Hello, welcome to our first episode of Tri-Radio Solutions podcast, Steering the Ship, navigating the choppy waters of research and development. I'm your host, Mike Jensen. I'll be joined today by my co-host, Leo Dodds. In this first episode, we would like to talk about CAPA, Corrective Action and Preventive Action plans, give a little brief history and overview, and kick off our first series, which will be a deep dive into CAPA, what you need to know. So for a little more explanation, I'll turn it over to Leo.
Thanks, Mike. So what we'd like to do is give you an overview of CAPA, hopefully how it fits into the overall quality system, and how really CAPA is a pillar of that quality system. And in fact, Mike, I will share with you, I used to hate CAPAs for the longest time, as most other people, I think, who are in contact with CAPA, they also share my dislike for CAPA. But I will say, I now love CAPA. And I love CAPA now because I figured it out. And what I'd like to do here today is just give you, first of all, a glimpse into CAPA, just its structure, and there's a couple of secrets even that we can share today. And then what we can do in subsequent podcasts is drill down a little bit deeper, not too deep, but just deep enough so that people can understand A, how to approach it and why they are even doing these things, and B, how to, get a decent CAPA plan, improvement plan on the back end of employing this methodology. So that's what I'd like to do.
Awesome. That sounds like a good start to our podcast, which will also cover a wealth of other areas within research and development as well, including our vendor management oversight, as well as inspection readiness. But we chose CAPA, given your love for CAPA, which hopefully one person can identify with, and the other ones will probably think you're nuts, but they're the ones that probably have the most to learn from this. So if you wouldn't mind, figure this first episode will go through some of the background.
Yeah, sure.
And start looking at that process from a high level.
Super. So, so the first thing I think to understand is that CAPA is an acronym. It stands for Corrective Action, Preventive Action Plan. So a CAPA plan is a corrective action, preventive action plan.
So can I stop you right there as the novice in research and development? Why isn't it PACA? Shouldn't it be preventative before corrective? Do we have this backwards?
Yeah, that's probably a good point. We should bring it up to the CAPA, gods somewhere in the quality world. But I think, first of all, CAPA just sounds better maybe. But
I agree.
I think, once we go through some of those core definitions, you'll see that we've got to get to some of the earlier things before we get to some of the later things. And, like everything else, there's a certain progression, and maybe that's a good place to start. So a couple of key definitions. The three that I think that are most important are a correction, a corrective action, and a preventive action. So all three of these things sound very similar, but they're distinctly separate items. So if we can just align on what those definitions are, it might help out. The correction is any action you take that fixes a past problem, but doesn't prevent it from happening again. Okay, so an example of a correction, which is not a corrective action, is submitting a late case safety report to a health authority once you found out that it was late. So you're fixing a past problem. I had this case that I was supposed to submit to the health authority. I found it, I submitted it. That's a good thing that I did it, even though it was late. But it doesn't help me understand why that happened or how to prevent it from happening again. So that's a correction. Fixes a past problem, doesn't do anything about fixing a future one. Okay. Then there's a corrective action, which is an action that you take that prevents a recurrence of the past problem. Okay, so
further.
Yeah, I know it's a little bit tricky. So an action that you take to prevent the recurrence of a past problem. So an example would be updating an SOP to improve its clarity that led to a problem in the past. So I can only implement a corrective action if I know why something broke, right? So that's a corrective action. So it's actually, that's an action that I take that's going to prevent this thing from happening again. That's called a corrective action.
Okay.
Correction. And then there's a preventive action, which is an action taken to prevent a first time occurrence of a potential problem. Okay, so I know it's a little weird. What we're doing is we're saying, you know what? I understand what broke before. I'm going to fix it here. And because I know my overall processes and how things fit together, I could have that same problem occur somewhere else. It hasn't yet, but I'm going to fix it over there as well before it even breaks. So that's called a preventive action. So I'm preventing it from ever breaking because I think there's probably a susceptibility to a problem some other place. So when I look around and come up with my corrective and preventive action plan, my CAPA plan, I'm going to look for opportunities to try to improve things that maybe haven't broken yet, but they're a little bit weak. So that's called a preventive action. Okay.
Okay.
Cool. So correction, corrective action, preventive action. Those are the three things. And so back to your question, Mike, why do we call it a CAPA plan and not a PACA plan? Is because we typically start from the oldest, easiest things and then progress into the things that go into the future. Pretty
Here
cool.
we go.
All right. So here, a little bit of history. All right. So I don't know if this is actually a fun fact or if it's an urban myth. It probably can't be an urban myth because I don't think enough people talk about it. But I think, and what I heard was that CAPA as a methodology, I will call it a science, actually started, it has its roots in the mid 20th century of the space program. So if you think back to those days or remember it from school history class, they were lighting up these rockets, shooting them into space. Sometimes there were people in them, and it was really risky. Some of them blew up on the launch pad. Some of them went off flawlessly, but they really had no way of knowing which ones were going to work and which ones didn't. And it was super expensive and very dangerous. And they realized pretty early on that they needed a better strategy than just hoping the next one was going to work. So they turned it into a complete science and started out trying to understand, why things break, what was the cause of the break, and then how to improve that for the next time so it doesn't break again, right? And so that logic, that methodology became super useful, not only for application in the space program, but then manufacturing and industry and all these other places that were looking to improve process with some certainty turned to that and said, we could really use this. This is awesome. So it made its way into industry. It certainly made its way into anything that was regulated. And now it's moving further and further, I would say, away from manufacturing and into other areas that are really super important and have a lot of patient safety impacts, like clinical and pharmacovigilance and labs and things like that as well. So that's a little bit of history about CAPA. And I guess if that's true, you could say that this is actually rocket science.
Sounds good. Loose definition, but we'll take it. It's all science.
And then another little fun fact, which I believe is still true, is that this is the number one reason for FDA Form 483 observations, those are the dings you get when you get inspected, come as a result of a poor CAPA or a non-existent CAPA. So if you can get that right, it can really solve a lot of problems for you. So that's the moral of that little story. So here is inside tip number 1. Actually, I'm going to tell you in just a moment. Before I do that, I'm going to tell you the 5 steps to a good CAPA. Okay. So the 5 steps to a good CAPA are these. Ready?
I'm ready. Edge of my seat.
The problem statement. Some people call it the description of the problem. The problem statement is number 1. The investigation. And in that investigation, there is the root cause analysis. And then you get to your CAPA, and then you wrap it up with an effectiveness check. And we'll go into a little more detail around each of those 5 steps in the process, but here's the little secret. In those 5 steps, you've got to do each of those 5 steps in order. And if you do each of those 5 steps in order, you'll get a pretty decent CAPA.
As opposed to skipping to the last one and trying to save money and time?
Or what everybody wants to do is get right to the fix-it plan, the CAPA, without understanding what broke. Apart from saying, yeah, it was Mike's fault. Right? So swap him out and get somebody else in there. You've got to go through those 5 steps: problem statement, investigation, root cause analysis, CAPA plan, and effectiveness check. So if you do those 5 things in order, very linear, you'll get a pretty decent CAPA, and you might have a quality professional step in at the end just to help, tighten it up a little bit, but you'll typically get a pretty good CAPA if you follow those steps. Make sense?
Makes sense.
Cool. So what we will do in future podcasts is go into a little more detail around how to frame these things out, but I'm going to give you just sort of a super high thumbnail for each of those 5 steps in the CAPA plan. Okay.
So a little teaser for the next episode.
Exactly. So the problem statement, what we want to do there is be specific. So, there used to be this old TV show that was around before either of us were born. And there was this one detective, and he'd say, "Just the facts, ma'am. I just want the facts." And that's basically what we're trying to do in the problem statement. We just want all the basic elements of what broke. The one thing I do not want to know in the problem statement is why it broke, right? I want to know when it broke, where it broke, who was involved, what other things were happening. Any of that type of information helps me define my problem statement. And it's a description of the problem. And I'm doing it in objective terms. And the more precise I can be in that description, stops me from then investigating the entire universe to try to figure out why it broke. So I'm trying to keep some, constraints and limits around what I'm going to investigate next. So that's the problem statement. So I want to be factual, objective, and I do not want to know that it broke because Mike broke it.
Leave the blame out of that one.
Totally leave the blame out of that one. Then you get to the investigation. This is where I often like to categorize investigations into 3 broad buckets. One is people, that's like organizations, training, background. Am I educated on this? Have I done, all of the people as the organization structure the right way, all that stuff. So there's people element, then there's a process element. That's the big one. That's where you look at your current SOPs, your standard operating procedures, and understand how the process works and what, are there any flaws in the process itself? And then tools is the last bucket that I typically look at. And under tools, I use all like computer systems, data reporting, all of those things that help me to undertake the process. So I look at it in people, process, and tools. I will conduct some interviews, start to collect some ideas, and there are a number of different methods we can employ as we go through that. We'll look as we dig in there. That's my investigation. And then part of that investigation is going to lead me to my root cause analysis. So that is where the goal of the root cause analysis is to, it's not a big surprise, identify the root cause. Right? So that's what we do. And there's a number of different ways of doing root cause analysis. One of them, the most straightforward ways of doing it for many people, for a lot of problems, not everyone, but for most that we encounter, is something called 5 why. And again, it's got to be done in order here, but you're asking why. It's almost, if you've got a small son or daughter and they're asking you why, daddy, why, it's the same kind of thing here. And you're saying,
got a 3-year-old, so I hear you there.
Well, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Why is this ice cream melting? Because it's hot. Why is it, hotter? Why is it, because the sun is shining? Why, and on and on and on. And so the idea is if you ask why 5 times, you'll probably be at that root cause. Sometimes you get to the root cause even before the 5th why. But the trick with that one, as we'll see when we dive into it, is that your next why question needs to be based on your last answer. Right? That's
you gotta think about it and formulate it and then go, not just rapid fire what's on your mind.
Yeah, it's like you're peeling off that onion. So that's a root cause analysis. Then you get to your CAPA, which we will learn needs to be a SMART CAPA. That's another acronym. And so it's only when you know what your root cause is that you can implement a corrective action, preventive action plan, if you remember our definitions from before. That's why you've got to do these things in order. You can't just jump over to the CAPA. You got to do them, you got to drill down, right? And so you can come up with your CAPA plan, which is a little mini project plan, is all it is, right? Mm-hmm. And you will look at the outcomes of that. You will check to see if they actually did fix the problem. That's called your effectiveness check. And there's usually some objective evidence you need for that. And when you've got it, you're done.
Simple as that. Stay linear.
Exactly. Nothing complex here. Believe me. So those are the 5 steps of CAPA. What we'll do in subsequent podcasts is just drill into a little more detail around the problem statement, investigation, root cause analysis, CAPA plan, and effectiveness check. I think in addition to these things being linear, that is to say, we do them in order, and we've been through that. The other thing I think that's important to take away from this, and we touched on it, is that you don't just jump to your CAPA. It's always important to understand what is broken before you go to fix it. So you need to do a root cause analysis. And in order to do that, you need to know what you're trying to find the root cause analysis of, which is your problem statement. So that's why you've got to do those things in order. You will get to the CAPA. You don't start at the CAPA. And so that's it. That's, I think, podcast on CAPA series, podcast number 1.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Leo. And this is Mike Jensen signing off for Steering the Ship. And we look forward to any questions or comments. If you post below, we'll happy to address those in future episodes. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.